Well, guys, Push 2009, starring Chris Evans, Dakota Fanning, and others. You would think with a title like Push that it would have action. Push is an actual verb in the English language. It's quite an action word, an action keyword, if you will. Push. Yeah, and I'm sorry, but there's not much action here. There's just a whole lot of talking, a whole lot of riding around, walking around, and talking, and it's very boring. Let's get right into this. 23% on the tomato meter, 42% on the audience score, and wow, look at that number of audience reviews. 2 million plus audience reviews, and we have a 42% audience score. I have no idea why there are so many audience reviews. It is certainly rotten, and I agree it's rotten, and I also agree with that 42% score. In fact, I wouldn't mind at all if that dropped down to a 32% score, because this thing deserves all its rottenness. It is simply just boring. For something that's supposed to be action, it's supposed to be exciting, a premise that's supposed to involve telekinesis, telepathy, mind reading. It's supposed to involve people with all kinds of, superpowers, if you will, almost like the X-Men. But this is just a whole lot of boring, and it looks like it was filmed with this crazy green filter put over everything. It's worse, in fact, than what I remember from the first Matrix movie in 1999. It's got this weird green filter over everything, so where there should be just simply white fluorescent light all around our characters, it somehow looks green, and a lot of the actual set design is designed to show you a lot of green glowing signage, and I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Maybe it's a Chinese thing, I don't know. But this entire thing is filmed around and inside the Hong Kong area. This is the Hong Kong before it was turned back over to China, but not that that matters. This is simply, most of this film looks like it was shot inside somebody's dirty bathroom, and it's just like a whole lot of ugly parts of Hong Kong, and it's not doing itself a favor by being set there. I'm not sure if that's a budget problem. That's why it was there. It doesn't make any sense. The basic plot here is that Chris Evans plays a character who has some kind of telekinesis. His dad had telekinesis. He's on the run from this organization based in the United States called The Division, and The Division is tracking people with telekinesis and other mental powers, and it is trying to develop them into weapons. And apparently the Chinese have some knowledge of this too, and there's some kind of Chinese organization that has a Chinese version of this, the Division, and they're also using people with strange powers that can make you bleed and etc. And it sounds so exciting just from that, but how do you make that into something boring? Well, you have Chris Evans and others and Dakota Fanning just standing around and walking around through, Chinese vegetable markets, and standing up against walls in crappy looking areas of Hong Kong, and just looking around at things and talking a whole lot of very boring and contrived dialogue, and there's very little action, and when there is some action it goes on for a few minutes, and then it goes right back to people walking around through vegetable markets and riding in taxis and talking and talking and talking and sitting around and laying around in hotel rooms and talking and talking and talking, and it was just a slog to get through this. And the dialogue itself, there is so much dialogue, just so much dialogue going on, and none of it's exciting. It's very boring and pointless and by the numbers, and I almost felt bad for all these actors. And in a lot of the scenes, it's obvious that the actors themselves are bored out of their minds, and the characters they're playing are also bored out of their minds, and it shows definitely. I could barely get through this thing without fast forwarding it. I wanted to so badly, but I managed to somehow make it through just barely. Now let's get right to the audience reviews and find out if everybody else thinks this thing is as boring as I did. 3 stars from January 5, 2020, making it about a week ago. Quote, totally watchable, totally forgettable, better stoned. If I had to put a star rating on this, I'm going to say half a star, because the sheer boredom overrules and overrides anything else redeemable here. There are plot holes, there are other problems, I have a list. I have one of my nice little lists, but no, I'm just going to say the boredom alone is the fatal part of this. I'd say half a star. A movie was made, people got paid. Maybe taxes were collected in Hong Kong. I don't know. In any case, half a star. I'm not going to read anything or entertain anything above 3 stars because I just can't take it serious. Let's move on. December 26, 2019, 1 star. Poorly executed, nonsensical garbage. 2.5 stars, September 14. Push has some creative action sequences plus visuals, and it's somewhat enjoyable to see Chris Evans play an anti-hero rather than the more goody two-shoes Captain America, but the movie is also slow-paced, convoluted, and would rather copy and paste elements from Heroes and X-Men, which is a shame because I actually do think this could have been a genuinely great and unique superhero film. The screenplay isn't effortless, but having someone whose superpower is epic screaming is just as silly. Yeah, there are villains in this. There are Chinese villains, a couple of them. They're like twins or something. They have this power. They're called like blood letters or something along those lines, and they come up to you and they take off their sunglasses and they scream and their eyes turn into cat's eyes while they scream all hideously, and blood comes out of your body and fish tanks around you explode and the blood sprays out of the fishes, and it's completely ridiculous. And the first time I saw it, I laughed out loud. It's not supposed to be funny. It's actually as gruesome as a PG-13 movie can muster to keep that rating, but it's just laugh out loud funny. And every time I saw one of those Chinese characters start screaming and their fangs would come out and their eyes would become like cat's eyes, and Chris Evans and whoever else that was in their range would roll around trying to cover their ears while blood sprayed out of their nostrils or whatever. It was just kind of laugh out loud funny, and it's unfortunate that there just wasn't more of that in the film to laugh at. There was a lot of other stupid stuff, but it just wasn't funny like that, and I'm just kind of wishing there was more of that. But you got to see this 3 or 4 times, and on at least 2 of those times I laughed out loud. Certainly the first time I saw it. It's silly, and like this reviewer said, it's kind of like they're taking elements from the X-Men, but they're doing it in the most boring ways, and they're doing it in kind of ridiculous ways. It's like a really bad budget version of the X-Men with no creativeness put into it whatsoever. And I will say one thing, the director, whoever it was, they wanted to do some kind of experimental film student looking look on their action setups and their filmography. Like, they used a lot of handheld cam that had a little bit of shakiness in it, not complete shaky cam like Bourne Supremacy or something, but just a little bit of the shaky cam, handheld, sometimes blurry and out of focus or grainy looking to be sort of artistic looking. I think it was an attempt to cover up the fact that all they really had the budget to do was walk around the vegetable markets, the really poor and seedy looking vegetable markets in Hong Kong somewhere. And it showed. I mean, it's just like a lot of really bad choices in camera angles, a lot of Dutch angles, a lot of weird experimental places to put cameras that don't really make it exciting. They make it a little bit hard to follow at times. So yeah, it just felt experimental, and the director wanted to do some kind of artsy-fartsy experimental stuff, and didn't work for me. I was still bored out of my mind. Let's move on. 2.5 stars, July 2019. Cool concept, can be kind of confusing at times. Some characters lack believable motivation. Yeah, it's very confusing because more and more characters just show up and none of them really have any backgrounds established or reasoning or motivation beyond just the very shallow stuff to their heroes and villains, cardboard nature. And as the plot, as the running time goes along, you just get introduced to more and more characters in contrived ways that you're just wondering what the hell's going on. You almost lose track of what's going on, and despite how slow paced this is and how boring it is, you still manage to lose track of exactly, okay, what characters related to who, and who knew who before, and who's trying to do what. And like, there's just so many characters doing weird things, you just get lost. At a certain point I just kind of thought I knew what was going on, but at other times I got confused and I couldn't figure out why this woman that showed up wanted to do X, Y, and Z, and why anybody cared. And the whole thing was like that. I'm just wondering, yeah, why should I care? Because nothing was set up. You know, it's very shallow. Everybody just shows up and they want to get some magic serum that's going to make people that already had these telekinetic powers even more powerful, and everybody wants to get their hands on this serum. But that's basically the simple nature of the plot, yet more and more characters keep showing up with different weird relationships to each other that are hard to keep track of. Half a star. Very distributed line of thought as far as narrative. Absolutely no thriller involved, just a sequence of semi-action scenes. Yeah, exactly. It's all over the place, like it goes off all over the place. The narration's all over the place. People are walking all over the place and doing a whole lot of nothing. There's no thrills at all. Even the action sequences are very boring. Just a whole lot of weird experimental camera positions, like I mentioned. 2 stars, April 9, 2019. This movie was terrible. One of the worst comic book movies ever made. It was dull, boring, convoluted, and kind of confusing. The characters were uninteresting. The plot was generic. It's a really forgettable film. The cast was at least great. Yeah, there were a lot of decent actors in this. A lot of people that have gone on to a lot of other movies, comic book movies, and other types of movies. And these, you would think with all this acting talent that it would have been good in some way, but it's not. They just do a whole lot of nothing, just a whole lot of talking to each other in very boring ways. Whoever wrote the dialogue, scriptwriter or whoever, they need to go back to school because they don't know how to do it. I was never so bored in my life at all the lines of dialogue that were just spewed out over and over. Very boring. And I have a list here, of course. Yeah, at the beginning, these 2 agents show up and they discover where the character of Nick, played by Chris Evans, has been hiding in Hong Kong. And when these 2 agents show up, the first thing they need to do is explain to Nick in all this boring detail how they managed to track him down using his toothbrush from long ago. And the reason they need to explain all this stuff to him isn't because villains would actually, need to explain to him how they tracked him down. Of course they wouldn't. Why would they bother? They need to do this so that they can tell the audience kind of what's going on. And there's a lot of that. Just a lot of the villains, the bad guys, need to talk a whole lot. They're just too busy talking to actually just dispatch with you, so that the audience can get even more convoluted backstory information out. Just big exposition dumps. It's so boring. Let's move on. 2.5 stars, August 9, 2018. This movie is not as bad as the rating suggests. It's actually a fun little movie that has grown better in hindsight, with Chris Evans becoming a mega star. Well, maybe that's why this has 2 million audience reviews, because fans of Chris Evans from the MCU franchise they've been coming to this over the years and just leaving their kind or not so kind words on it. That would explain the huge number of audience reviews, but this boring movie, it certainly doesn't deserve these user reviews. This is a completely forgotten about movie. 2 pages into the audience reviews, we're already back in the summer of 2018. That's 2 years ago. So the reason this was forgotten, of course, like I said, it's just very boring. People are actually rating this higher because they're just fanboys of Chris Evans, I guess. And like I said, even with all that upvoting, it still has a 43%. That's pretty sad. Let's check my list. Yeah, the Chinese bleeders. They're called bleeders, these Chinese characters that can like scream really loud and make you bleed out of your ears and everywhere else. And really bad versions of characters you might find in the X-Men. Disgusting too, and I'm sure it would have been a lot more disgusting if it wasn't rated PG-13. If this had been an R-rated film, probably heads would be exploding like tomatoes. But fortunately, it's only PG-13. Too many odd characters coming and going, and the plot becomes overly complicated with all these characters. Yeah, you just keep getting introduced to more and more characters. I mean, you're more than halfway through the movie, and you're suddenly discovering new characters that just show up in Hong Kong, and it's never really explained how anybody gets to Hong Kong or why anybody would need to go to Hong Kong. Like, if you were some kind of telekinetic powered person on the run from some shadowy government agency in the US, what would make you and everybody else like you just decide to go to Hong Kong? I mean, there are a lot of places on earth that are even better for hiding out from the US government, but everybody just decides to go to Hong Kong, and characters just literally show up in Hong Kong, and it doesn't even explain how they got there. One girl just appears on the dock, fully clothed in Hong Kong. Excuse me. The movie starts with her being on the run from the government. At the beginning, she escapes from this lab, and then later on in the movie, it shows her just waking up on a just a random dock somewhere in the harbor of Hong Kong, and she's fully clothed like somebody just put her there, and then she just carries on about her business in Hong Kong. Did she get off a boat? Was she deposited there by teleportation? Like, it's just really weird. Everybody just magically shows up in Hong Kong. No explanation of why they chose Hong Kong. Even Chris Evans' character, when you meet him for the first time, you're never told why he chose to just hang out in Hong Kong. It's just where everybody goes that has psychic powers. Never mind the fact that there's plenty of people shown to you in China and in Hong Kong that also have these powers. So why would you want to go there? I don't know. It's very strange. It's another plot hole in the film. What else is on my list? Yeah, there's an American girl. Okay, one of the, I don't know, the hero characters, she escaped from the division. She's in Hong Kong. Yeah, she's an American. She's never been to China. She's never lived in Britain. So when she escapes from the bad guys, she just jumps into a car and drives off and has no problem driving around on the opposite side of the road, sitting on the opposite side of the car. No problem at all, despite the fact that she's an American. Yeah, that's really believable. You think you're just going to jump into a car where they drive on the opposite side of the road and just speed away like you're an expert at it? That's not how it works. That's another problem. That's just stuff like that in the movie, small stuff that just doesn't help the fact that it's boring on top of that. 3 stars, gritty gangster home brand X-Men. Yeah, it's gritty in that it looks like it was all filmed in somebody's bathroom. Everything's got this weird bathroom tile to it. There are construction sites that are basically like the inside of some warehouse filled with bamboo scaffolding, and I guess what are supposed to be colored bags of concrete are laying around just for the visuals. When they explode, the colored powder can go everywhere. Don't put a lot of thought into this. If this story came from a comic book, then maybe that's what's going on, but none of it makes any sense. There's an actual giant building in Hong Kong that's under construction. I don't know if it's a real building or not, because it could be CGI or it could be a real building that was used in the filming. In any case, there's this skyscraper in Hong Kong still under construction, and its apparent only purpose seems to be a giant building that you can put a row of lockers in, like a row of lockers you would find in a cheap high school locker room. And part of the plot revolves around this serum that's hidden in a briefcase in one of these lockers. This is just a row of lockers that's sitting in the middle of a construction site in a building in Hong Kong. And part of the plot revolves around the characters needing a key to get into this locker. But these lockers are like the kind of lockers that wouldn't stop me from getting in with just my bare hands, but suddenly these shadowy organizations need like to find this key to get into this locker. Really? And there's nothing else in this giant building that's under construction except this row of lockers just conveniently sitting there in the middle of the construction area. Like, what? And they put some hard hats on top of the lockers, this row of lockers, to suggest that maybe these lockers were there in the middle of this construction zone because they're like construction worker lockers or something. What? It's completely ridiculous. And most of this film is just Chris Evans and Dakota Fanning walking around through seedy areas of Hong Kong. And yeah, let's move on. 2 stars. Brutally uninteresting, characters were unlikable, and it would have been just as entertaining if all the heroes died. Yeah, there's nobody likable in this. Everybody's just boring and just likes to talk a lot and walk around and look at things a lot. And everybody's conveniently got pistols. Every character, even Dakota Fanning, who is 13-year-old, her character is like 12 or 13-year-old character. And she's got a couple of dual pistols that she can dual wield, that she's carrying around in her pants. And everybody's carrying around 9mm pistols in their pants. And I don't know how that works in Hong Kong, where everybody can just carry around all these pistols that come out of nowhere. Nothing in the story explains how they got these pistols. And they're pointing them around and using them wherever they want, and the police are never involved, and nobody turns them in. And you can see Chris Evans walking around the streets of Hong Kong with obviously a pistol stuck out of the front of his pants. You can see it under his shirt, and other people would easily see this on the streets of Hong Kong, but nobody's going to turn him in. I'm quite certain that in Hong Kong you can't just walk around with 9mm pistols sticking out of your waistband and nobody's going to turn you into the police, and the police aren't going to notice. And conveniently, the police are nowhere to be found in this film, despite the packed streets of Hong Kong and all the packed areas and the diners and the vegetable markets they're in, and they're having these shootouts. Not one cop to be found in all of the city of Hong Kong. Really, really pathetic. Let's move on to some more reviews here. 1 star, January 30, 2017. Let's push this movie out of the way because it's not good. That's all I have to say. 2 out of 10. Yeah, 2 out of 10. You're being too kind. I give this half a star. Then we have Muhammad A., our good old friend, the bot Muhammad A. He actually said January 5th, 2017, it's a good movie to watch. Like, that's what he always says. But on this hand, this occasion, he actually put 1.5 stars instead of his usual 3 stars. So there's that. One of these days, maybe we'll meet up with him again. We probably will. 1 star, September 20, 2016. We're now back more than 3 years in time. This movie has bad plot, too many misleading, unclarified, and absolutely no characters introduction. Bad director. I have no idea what's going on after watching it. Wasted few hours of my life. Yeah, the longer the running time goes on, the more you're introduced to further characters from the past that you just don't give a shit about, because you don't even give a shit about the ones that the movie started with, and the plot becomes more convoluted, and you're trying to figure out, okay, who is this lady related to, and whose mom is she, and how does she fit into this? And the movie is just all over the damn place. And yeah, 1 star, June 23rd, 2016. Push is a disappointing film. It is about 2 young Americans with special abilities who must race to find a girl in Hong Kong before a shadowy government organization does. Camilla Bell and Dakota Fanning give horrible performances. The script is badly written. Paul McGuigan did a terrible job directing this movie. I was not impressed with this motion picture. Yeah, this director, I think he also did Lucky Number 11. And it shows that movie is nearly just as boring as this one. So apparently this director is just a boring director. He likes boring films. It's his trademark, maybe. As far as Dakota Fanning giving a horrible performance, she spends a lot of her time walking around in front of walls and in alleys, looking at things, sketching in her notebook. It's very boring. I wouldn't call it a performance as much as it's just very boring to see her stand around and walk around in front of different walls, very ugly walls on the streets of Hong Kong, and I'm not sure why I sat through it, but I did just so I could talk about it. 2 stars, May 6, 2016. In spite of good performances from Evans and Fanning, no, they're not good performances. Supported by Wen and Curtis, I can't help but say, what the heck did I just watch? Yeah, at the end of this, you're wondering what was the point. There was no real point to it, no theme to be found. Yes, the bad guys were defeated at the end, but for what purpose, I don't know. Did it solve anything? Not really. Did you know anything more at the end of this film that you knew at the beginning? No, not really. You're just as confused at the end as you were at the beginning, and you got 0 out of this. This is very much a 0-calorie sort of drink, except it's a drink that's also very tasteless. In fact, it's pretty much just like as enjoyable as drinking a glass of water. If you want to compare it to something like that, that's what you get out of this film. Not a whole lot of anything. Unlike water, though, this film isn't necessary. Water at least has a purpose, right? This film has no purpose at all. You know, off my list, let's just say that there's a character in this film. You know, one of my big plot hole problems is there's a character in this film whose magic ability is to convince people that things are things that they're not. Like, for example, he spends his time in nightclubs, lounges, and he passes what are basically empty slips of paper to people that he's marked the denominations on them with a Sharpie so he can tell what they are. And he tells people as he passes them these blank pieces of paper that they are different types of money, and the person sees that as money. This illusion like makes him basically able to conjure money up and give it to people, but the movie doesn't explain how he's able to just keep frequenting these restaurants and lounges, giving them fake pieces of paper. He would have been caught the first time because the movie says that these illusions that he passes to people, they wear off after a short amount of time. Maybe it's an hour or two. They become obvious slips of paper again. But yet he just keeps going back to businesses and passing them these pieces of paper again, making them think that it's money. I think after the first time he did this, he would be wanted by the police and he would be in jail. But nope, the movie just has him using this ability at leisure, just keeps going back and doing business with these same nightclub hostesses and whatnot, passing fake money off to them, and somehow they don't remember that their cash register already has all this fake money from the last time he visited. This movie, I mean, really, on top of just the boredom, it's got this stupid type of plot logic. And another thing off my list, speaking of plot logic, one of the characters that escaped to Hong Kong somehow, she's an American. She certainly always drove on the right side of the road, as we do in America. And yet, when she's in Hong Kong, she just jumps into a car and speeds off through the streets of Hong Kong, driving on the left side of the road and sitting on the right side of the car, and this isn't a problem for her at all. She does it like she's done it many times before. I'm sorry, but it doesn't work like that. I know because I've been in countries where they drive on the other side, the British way, and as an American, you do not just get in and start driving without problems. You're lucky if you can cross the street without problems because you're looking the wrong way for oncoming traffic. I ought to know, this has happened to me. So no, you don't just, some girl doesn't just jump into a car and start driving around on the streets of Hong Kong. It's this type of stuff too that's a complete fail. Moving along, 2 stars, December 8, 2015. We're back more than 4 years in time now. I didn't really get the point of it. Dakota Fanning is too mature for herself, not believable. Some good bits, but it wasn't quite the superpower film it could have been, nor subtle enough to be a decent thriller. If someone asked me what the film is about, I wouldn't be able to tell you. Well, yeah, exactly, and they bring up a good point. Dakota Fanning's character in this is 13 years old. A lot of the other characters make fun of her and call her a 12-year-old because she looks like one, but she is actually 13, her character is. Yet her character walks around with, pistols. She dual wields like 9mm pistols, and it's completely ridiculous. And she drinks whiskey out of a flask that she purchases from somewhere and gets bombed and, talks to people like she's 20-something years old, that she's just as old as Chris Evans. And it's completely ridiculous seeing her order Chris Evans around and all this stuff, and dual wield pistols. And while we're on the subject of pistols, let's just talk about the fact that all these characters walk around the streets of Hong Kong wielding and dual wielding pistols, and they never run across any police. Not a single cop in sight on the packed streets of Hong Kong, no matter where they go, no matter how many bullets are fired in restaurants and on the streets. No police reports. Police never show up. And you can walk around. It shows Chris Evans walking around on the streets of Hong Kong. And it's obvious he's got a pistol sticking out of his pants. You can see it sticking out of his pants. And characters walking around, other people walking around doing their business on the streets of Hong Kong would easily see that sticking out of his pants like it is. And yet nobody calls the police or has a problem with this. Yeah, that's really realistic. A lot of problems like that in this film. 1.5 stars. Confusing and mystifying viewer seems to be the sole purpose of the paranormally motivated push, with an obviously inexplicable absence of logic. Yes, no logic. Director Paul McGuigan delivers a visual success teeming with atmosphere but completely devoid of audience appeal. There's no atmosphere here, unless you consider like the inside of dirty bathrooms to be atmosphere. And all the green filter put over all the fluorescent lights, that's atmosphere. I'm sorry, it isn't. The influences for B-movie push are made abundantly clear, serving as the antidote for Marvel and DC Comics' stock standard superhero themes, the resolutely convoluted and appalling imitation of recycled ideas lazily. Wow, that's a whole lot of word salad just to say that this thing sucked. If this is supposed to deconstruct Marvel or DC superhero movies, it's a complete fail on that because this in no way feels like a superhero movie until the final battle at the end. And then it feels like some kind of generic, really low budget X-Men battle at the end. And it's completely boring on top of it. So don't even compare this to the worst of Marvel and DC movies. The worst of the Marvel and DC movies are far superior to this. At least they're not as boring as this is. This is like watching paint dry, really. 1.5 stars, April 3rd, 2015. A cliche people with superpower sci-fi action film. Push follows the silly plot of government wanting to turn these people into super soldiers. The protagonist must race to fight against the government officials. The worst part of the film was probably the soundtrack. It was honestly one of the worst I've ever heard. The cast was pathetic to say the least. I have no idea why Evans would have agreed to be part of this film. Fanning's acting was sloppy and Bell was entirely unconvincing. You really feel no sympathy. Yeah, you don't feel sympathy for anybody because all the characters are completely unlikable, boring, and you're just wondering what the hell they're doing and how they're related to each other, and you never quite figure it out. As far as the music, yeah, it was on my list. It's very jarring. It's very cheap. It's very off-putting because none of the crazy music actually fits anything that's going on when the music shows up. This music just starts playing and it's a complete fail. It's weird and you're left wondering, what does the music, this weird music with all these clashing cymbals and etc., have to do with anything? It doesn't. And it does, this film also, in a similar vein, it suffers from a little bit of the shaky cam used in intimate dialogue scenes, where I guess the director knew it was kind of boring in some stretches of dialogue, so he kind of put handheld shaky cam in there to make it more authentic and use Dutch angles and etc. And very experimental film school type camera work, and it doesn't work at all. It just makes it hard to follow what's going on sometimes. 2.5 stars, March 11, 2015. A rather incomprehensible movie that sounds great on paper, but not as a product. It doesn't even sound that great on paper. Yeah, we've seen this a lot of times in superhero films. There's some MacGuffin everybody's after, and it gives people some kind of superpower, and you've got to get to it before the bad guys do. It could have been great, but it doesn't even sound that original when I talk it back to myself like that. But continuing, 2 stars, February 15, 2015. Take notes. This is how you create a really good idea, universe, and then bore everybody to death instead of delivering on it for a good third-fourth of the film. Yeah, boredom is the name of the game here. This thing's boring all the way through. 3 stars, not bad. Mutants versus corporate mutants. Well, no, this movie doesn't even feature mutants. In fact, this movie fails because it doesn't even set up where the powers come from, what the rules of the powers are. You know, even the worst of the X-Men movies had rules and limitations, and it gave you some idea of what could and couldn't be done. Not in this film. It's just like, for example, Chris Evans' character, he starts out as like struggling just to make a dice roll come out the way he wants. He subsists when he's in hiding in Hong Kong by participating in these illegal street dice games or whatnot. Okay, fine. But, you know, he has to struggle really hard just to make the roll of the dice come out slightly different than they would have otherwise. And he has to be really close to the dice to make it happen. And it's obvious he's very underpowered compared to what the film showed you that his father could do at the opening scene of the movie. And yet, as the movie progresses, all of a sudden, Chris Evans' character of Nick, he just develops superpowers. All of a sudden, he's able to move guns all around a room and target them to people. All of a sudden, he can throw people across the room. All of a sudden, he can like just do all these superpowered things. And the movie never explains how he becomes so powerful because at the beginning, he was struggling just to affect the outcome of some dice. And then all of a sudden, he's just got all these abilities that he never had before, and the film just never even attempts to explain how this happens. At the end of the film, he's just a super badass with all these powers. Okay. 2 stars, October 2nd, 2014. Though the action is visually flashy and fast, Push suffers hardly through its bland characters and no flow through its bad story. It's not even visually flashy. It isn't really. It's just a lot of weird experimental camera angles and the action's very boring. Half a star, August 21, 2014. A complete waste of time. This movie tries to bring in complex characters with some typical Hollywood humor, which is just not working. It really gets stalled out in the middle and is in no way a joy to watch. I had to try twice to actually get through the first half of the movie. Terrible. Yeah, the first time I saw this was back when it came out on DVD. Probably in 2010, and I remember shutting it off about 1/3 of the way through. I don't even think I made it halfway through. I just got bored, and then I watched this again. I deliberately sat through this thing a few hours ago, and I understood why I shut it off, because it's hard to get through without just shutting it off. It's that boring. And yeah, it's a time waster because you don't even get some ham-handed theme in this. You get absolutely nothing. It's completely devoid of any message or any point to it at all at the end. And there's no humor. Like, this reviewer saying there's some kind of typical Hollywood humor. Like, no, there isn't. There aren't even Marvel one-liners in this. There's nothing. It's just a complete waste of everything. There's not even one. The only thing I laughed at was the characters that showed up and screamed, and their eyes turned into cat's eyes, and they looked like they had fangs, and they screamed a lot and made blood come out of your ears, and etc. And that was a little bit funny the first time I saw it, but it wasn't supposed to be funny. Unfortunately, nothing else in the movie was. It was just boring. Off of my list, yeah, what have I not mentioned? The experimental nature of the cameras. Yeah, there's a building that's basically a big construction site. It's a big building in Hong Kong that's under construction. I don't know if it's real or not, or if it was just all CGI. I don't know. The whole purpose of the building is just to have these really ratty, cheap-looking row of school-type lockers just in the middle of this construction area that has the MacGuffin that we're looking for in it, and it's completely stupid, and it doesn't belong there. It's so cheap. It's so bad. It's like there's this really sought-after MacGuffin, basically, that's in a row of school lockers in the middle of a construction site, and the director put some hard hats on top of those school lockers to make it look like maybe it was the lockers were there to be used by construction workers. But what? I've never seen a construction site with a row of school lockers just in the middle of it. And the rest of this construction site was just bamboo scaffolding with colored bags of powder, which I guess are supposed to be like concrete powder of some sort that's colored in different colors for some reason, just so that when the bad guys shoot at it, it can explode into colored powder. Nothing makes sense about this. Half a star, August 2014. There is honestly no storyline behind this movie. In fact, nothing really happens throughout this movie. I agree, nothing really happens. I was hooked the first 10 minutes of the movie, but that was only because I assumed there would be a hidden meaning at the end of the film. Unfortunately, nothing was achieved even at the end of the movie. In fact, unless you are absolutely bored and want to waste 2 hours with mindless entertainment, don't watch this. The special effects are nothing special. The character development is awful. Yeah, I agree completely with that, and I agree with the half a star. There's no reason to even waste your time with this. It's so damn boring and pointless and illogical. And I'll have to say that, this has over 2 million audience reviews. I'm hazarding to guess that it's because these are fanboys of Chris Evans' work in the MCU, and somewhere, probably back in time around 2010, they came onto Rotten Tomatoes and just talked this movie up a lot, and that's why we are left with this 42% on the audience review. I'm going to have to say it deserves a lot less than that. I could easily see this being a 22% on the audience review. If it wasn't for all those Chris Evans fanboys coming along and upvoting this just because it's Chris Evans, we would probably be closer to 22%, because the critics gave it 23. I don't know how they're not in the single digits. Maybe they were a fan of the director, or maybe they're also a fan of Chris Evans. I don't know, because this thing is all around just totally rotten and boring, and it was it was a chore to get through. And before I just bore myself to death, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'm going to see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.